Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, May 30th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israel committed a Rafah massacre with U.S. bombs. So investigations from CNN and the New York Times found that the bombs Israel dropped on a tent camp in Rafah on Sunday were made in the U.S. And of course, this isn't a surprise considering Israel gets most of its weapons and bombs from the U.S. Weapons experts examined debris that was filmed at the scene of the strike and identified it as a GBU-39 small diameter bomb, a munition manufactured inside the U.S. by Boeing. The Israeli military said that it used two munitions that had small warheads, each packed with 17 kilos of explosives, which is the traditional payload of a GBU-39. So it lines up with what Israel is saying publicly. And these bombs are designed for precise targeting, but weapons experts say that there's always a risk of mass casualties when dropping the bomb on such a densely populated area. So at least 45 displaced Palestinians were killed in the massacre, including 12 women, 8 children, and 3 elderly people. Despite claiming to oppose a major attack on Rafah, the Biden administration has made clear that the tent camp bombing will not impact U.S. support for Israel. U.S. officials are also claiming ignorance about whether or not a U.S.-provided bomb was dropped on the camp. When asked about the possibility, John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he deferred to Israel. He said, quote, "I can only point you to what the IDF said. Therefore, I cannot confirm whether or not it was a GBU-39 that delivered the payload on that bomb. You'd have to really talk to the IDF about that," end quote. And I saw in another press conference he did a day earlier, people were asking him about, what would you consider to be a major ground operation in Rafah? What is the red line? And he said, does this look like, he said something like, oh, we're not the Israeli government and we're not in Tel Aviv right now. Just the attitude that the U.S. just has no responsibility to know these things about this military campaign that it is supporting and backing, or they claim to care about the massive civilian casualties, but not even really seeming to be bothered with the fact that an American-provided, American-made bombs were used in this massacre. Again, we saw the videos, the charred bodies, the headless child being pulled out of the fire in that camp. And he couldn't be bothered. He says, ask Israel. That's their problem. All right, so the next one here. Israel says that the Gaza slaughter will continue for another 7 months. So the head of the Israeli National Security Council, Tzachi Hanegbi, he said on Wednesday that he expects Israeli military operations in Gaza to continue for at least another 7 months, which could bring us into early 2025 about. So he said, quote, "We expect another 7 months of fighting in order to deepen the accomplishments and achieve what we have defined as the destruction of the governmental and military capabilities of Hamas," end quote. So according to the latest numbers from Gaza's health ministry, at least 36,171 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's genocidal war, and the Palestinian Red Crescent estimates that over 15,000 children have been killed. And June 7th will mark 8 months of this, 8 months since Israel unleashed this campaign on Gaza after the Hamas attack on southern Israel. So that's what happened in the first 8 months. What's going to happen in the next 7 months? And I think the big risk, of course, is the starvation and disease, as the aid has really is just trickling in now. And we have just the people in these very desperate situations. So many more Palestinians could die of starvation and disease, as barely any aid has entered Gaza since Israel captured the Rafah crossing on the Egyptian border. So Hanegbi said that Israel currently controls 75% of the border between Egypt and Gaza, known as the Philadelphia Corridor. It's kind of a little buffer zone. So he said that they control 75% and that soon they'll control the whole thing. And then later in the day, the Israeli military announced that it had achieved, tactical control of the Philadelphia Corridor. So Israel's control of this corridor is technically a violation of the 1979 peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, which was signed following the 1978 Camp David Accords. Earlier this week, on Monday, Israeli gunfire killed at least 2 Egyptian soldiers, which of course risks a big escalation. Although Cairo, Sisi's government has been pretty silent on everything. I think they don't really have any interest in this thing escalating, and they're not going to really push back on what Israel is doing. All right, so the next one here, Gaza aid deliveries dropped by 2/3 since Israel's move into Rafah. So this article is from Reuters. The United Nations, which has warned of famine in Gaza, said on Wednesday the amount of humanitarian aid entering the enclave has dropped by 2/3 since Israel began its military operation in the enclave's southern Rafah region this month. The amount of food and other aid entering Gaza, already insufficient to meet the soaring needs, has further shrunk since May 7th. So that was the day that Israel captured the border crossing. So there's been a daily average of 58 aid trucks entering Gaza from May 7th to Tuesday of this week, compared with a daily average of 176 aid trucks from April 1st to May 6th. So it's a drop of 67%. And it says that those figures exclude private sector cargo and fuel. And that means things that people have to pay for. The United Nations has long said at least 500 trucks a day of aid and commercial goods need to enter Gaza. Since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly 8 months ago, aid for 2.3 million Palestinians has primarily entered through the 2 crossings into southern Gaza, the Rafah crossing from Egypt and the Kerem Shalom crossing from Israel. But deliveries were disrupted when Israel stepped up its military operations in Rafah with the stated aim of routing remaining units of Hamas fighters. So Egypt closed the Rafah border crossing due to the threat posed to humanitarian work, but on Friday agreed to send a backlog of aid and fuel trucks via the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is, if you look at the map, it's very close to Rafah, but that is stuff that enters from Israel. So, of course, the Rafah border crossing is still closed, and, the situation, the hospitals in Rafah are coming under attack. I should mention, that the Israeli assault, they continue to push further into Rafah, despite everything that's happening. When I'm international pressure wise, like the ICJ order, it's not stopping them or slowing them down. All right, so the next one here, another State Department official resigns over Gaza. So the Washington Post reported on Wednesday that another State Department official has resigned over President Biden's support for Israel's slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So this is Stacy Gilbert. She's a career official who worked in the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. She said in a resignation email to her colleagues that she disagreed with a State Department report that claimed Israel has not been blocking aid deliveries into Gaza. And this was the report. There was this new national security memorandum. The U.S. had to get assurances from countries receiving weapons from the U.S. engaged in active conflict that they wouldn't use the weapons to violate U.S. or international law, and that includes not blocking aid deliveries not blocking the delivery of U.S.-funded aid shipments. And the State Department issued this report and claimed that Israel was not obstructing aid deliveries somehow. They claimed that. And they also said that Israel was likely violating U.S. and international law with U.S. weapons, but said that they didn't have the proof, that they couldn't prove it, that there wasn't enough evidence. So, and what this report did is it allowed the U.S. to continue shipping weapons to Israel. So it's interesting. This woman is resigning directly in response to that. I haven't seen this. She hasn't really made any public statements. This was a report in the Washington Post And they didn't even have a comment from her. It was from other people within the State Department, I guess, that leaked it. And Josh Paul, who resigned from the State Department back in October, he was the first official to resign, and he's been very outspoken since. He noted that this coincided with the same day that the Biden administration said that massacre in Rafah, wasn't going to change anything. So he said, quote, "On the day when the White House announced that the latest atrocity in Rafah did not cross its red line, this resignation demonstrates that the Biden administration will do anything to avoid the truth," end quote. So far, this is the fourth State Department official to resign. And 3 officials from other departments have resigned over this Biden support for this genocidal slaughter in Gaza. And that includes 1 official from the Interior Department, the Education Department, and a U.S. Army major who worked for the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency. So quite a few officials have resigned. And these are just the ones that, public ones. There might be some people that did it quietly, or there might be some people who, didn't renew a contract or something and just wanted to leave quietly. I think that's possible as well. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills a child in Syria and wounds 10 civilians. So the Syrian Defense Ministry reported on Wednesday that an Israeli airstrike hit the coastal Syrian city of Baniyaz, killing a girl and injuring 10 other civilians. The Defense Ministry said in a statement, quote, "The Israeli enemy launched an air attack from the direction of Lebanon, targeting a central site and a residential building in the Baniyaz city in the coastal region, killing a girl and wounding 10 civilians," end quote. So the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, they also reported a girl was killed in the strike, and they put the number of civilians injured at 20. So more Israeli airstrikes on Syria, and they've been very frequent again. There was kind of a lull in Israel's airstrikes in Syria for after the April 1st bombing of the Iranian consulate, which, of course, that provoked the first ever Iranian missile and drone attack on Israeli territory. So there was a bit of a period of calm when it comes to Israel bombing Syria, but now they're really back at it again. On May 25th, an Israeli drone strike hit Syria and reportedly killed 2 members of Hezbollah, marking the 3rd time within that week. So that was last week. And so, again, it's been very frequent. And Israel, for those who don't know, has been bombing Syria with impunity for years now. And they really stepped up the strikes after October 7th. But I believe, because I used to always write up a story about every Israeli airstrike in Syria, because I feel like it's something that just didn't get enough attention. And before October 7th, I believe my count for the year was something like 23 or 24 times that Israel bombed Syria, launched airstrikes in Syria in 2023. All right, so the next one here, Israeli Defense Minister warns that the Lebanese will pay the price. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant took a tour of command and control centers attached to Israeli Northern Command, holding what officials are describing as an operational situation assessment. Gallant praised the precision of the Israeli troops, citing the 320 Hezbollah members who have been killed. There's also been about 80 or so civilians that have been killed. And he said that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is dragging Lebanon into a very different reality. So he said something kind of ominous. He warned, quote, "The ones who will pay the price are the residents of Lebanon," end quote. So it sounds like he is threatening Lebanese civilians. Gallant appeared to be most concerned about challenging Hezbollah's dismissal of his claim in April that half of Hezbollah's commanders had been killed in military operations. He then displayed photos of 9 Hezbollah officers killed by the IDF, who were described in the press as equivalent to brigadier generals. So that people thought that was an overestimate from Gallant, that more than half of Hezbollah commanders were killed, and of course, Hezbollah denied that. And again, there's been pretty heavy casualties on the Lebanon side. Over 400 people killed since October. All right, so the next one here, Blinken hints at a major Ukraine escalation. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday hinted that the U.S. may allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory with U.S.-made missiles, which would risk provoking a major response from Moscow. So Blinken made these comments during a visit to Moldova and repeated a line that he said before about this issue. He said, this has been his line lately, is, the U.S. does not encourage or enable Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, but where Ukraine decides to attack is ultimately up to them. So it's kind of Weasley as it is. And then he added on another slogan that leaves a lot of space for what he might mean here. So Blinken added that the U.S. would adapt and adjust its position on the battlefield, its position on this policy of enabling Ukrainian strikes inside Russia. And then when he was asked if that meant that the U.S. would support Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, Blinken replied, quote, adapt and adjust means exactly that, end quote. So, I mean, that sounds like he's saying, yeah, we're going to do that. And this comes after that New York Times report that said he was the one, he's been leading the charge within the Biden administration to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons so they can strike Russian territory. And this push to really escalate things comes as amid Russia's offensive in Kharkiv, which it launched from the Belgorod Oblast. And Putin warned on Tuesday that there would be major consequences for NATO countries that support long-range strikes on Russian territory. U.S. and British missiles have been used in strikes on Crimea, but not on the Russian mainland. So while he was in Moldova, Blinken also announced $135 million in aid for the country, explicitly in the name of countering China. And apparently $85 million is going to go toward energy infrastructure, and $50 million will be spent on overhauling the energy and farming industries and deterring disinformation. This is according to AP, whatever that means exactly. So, Moldova, I mean, you look at where it is on a map, just imagine Russian leaders going somewhere in South America or Central America and saying, here's some aid to deter the Americans from meddling in your politics, But anyway, very concerning with this escalation. I know I've been kind of really focusing on this a lot lately, but I mean, I think it's really important. If we start seeing the long-range U.S. missiles hitting Russian territory, who knows what could happen next after that. All right, so the next one here, the Houthis say that they downed another Reaper drone. So the Houthis said Wednesday that their forces downed another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone over Yemen and also claimed attacks on several ships as their campaign in response to Israel's onslaught in Gaza continues. So the Associated Press reported that it analyzed images showing a U.S. MQ-9 on its belly in the desert and noted that the aircraft looked relatively intact. The Houthis said the drone was downed over Yemen's Marib province and released footage that showed an aircraft being hit with surface-to-air missiles. A Pentagon official told AFP that the U.S. Air Force has not lost any aircraft operating within U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility. So that was the comment when asked about this, is that the Air Force hasn't lost any aircraft. The official did not elaborate any further. And AP did note that the MQ-9 Reaper drones are sometimes operated by the CIA. So it's possible that this is a CIA drone and other ones that have been downed as well. So you could see the video here. This drone does look very intact. Like when they show the whole thing, it looks like there's some damage in the middle of it. But I know some people were wondering if maybe it crashed when the pictures and videos first surfaced. So this is the sixth time that the Houthis said they downed a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. And the U.S. hasn't confirmed every single one, but I know for most of them, they admitted that they lost drones in Yemen. I think they didn't want to admit that the Houthis shot them down. But I know the fifth one, they just basically refused to comment on it. So these drones cost about $30 million a piece. So if 6 have been down, that means that they're $180 million in the hole, just in the costs for drones that they lost over Yemen, on top of the billions that they've spent on munitions in bombing Yemen and intercepting very cheap Houthi drones. So this whole thing continues. And the Houthis, they're officially known as Ansar Allah, they also claimed that their forces targeted 6 ships in 3 different seas: the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. So they said they hit 6 ships. The only one, or they said that they targeted 6 ships. It seems like they claim, even if they just fire a missile or a drone and it doesn't hit the ship, they still like announce the attack. The only one of these that has been confirmed to have been like hit is a Greek-owned bulk carrier called the Lax, and that was hit in the Red Sea. And the Houthis say that they're targeting Israeli-linked shipping, which they expanded to American and British shipping after the U.S. and the U.K. started bombing them back in January. It seems like the U.S. has not been bombing Yemen too much lately. I'll give an update probably in a few days when the Yemen Data Project tracks all the strikes in Yemen. So they put out like monthly updates, but I would guess for May, we haven't seen that many compared to previous months. But anyway, so they targeted this ship, and a security company that works for the ship, they're insisting that there's no ties to, that it had no ties to Israel, and actually that the shipping data showed that its destination was Iran. And I know this has happened in a few instances. So anyway, this stuff continues. I feel like I've been kind of neglecting the situation with the Houthis. They've been hitting ships, claiming a lot of attacks, and the U.S. has been like intercepting drones and stuff, but I haven't seen too many airstrikes in Yemen. All right, so the last story here, the unofficial U.S. embassy in Taiwan names its new director. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. And so this is the American Institute in Taiwan, which is the de facto embassy. The U.S. does not have an official diplomatic presence in Taiwan. That was part of the normalization deal with China that was formalized in 1979. So a senior Tokyo-based U.S. diplomat who has been critical of Beijing's military operations in the Indo-Pacific region will soon take over as director of the de facto U.S. embassy. The appointment follows a general election on the self-ruled island in January that has heightened cross-strait tensions. So this is Raymond Green, and he has served as the deputy chief of mission in Washington's Tokyo embassy since July 2021. So he's been in Japan, and now he's going to head the American Institute in Taiwan. And he has been there before. So this guy, there's a quote from him that I use a lot when I write about Taiwan, because he was in Taiwan, I think, from about 2018 to 2021, or maybe he was there for longer before that, but he was talking about, so he served there for about 3 years before leaving in 2021. So that timeline is about right. So he said, back in 2021, he said, when I first worked here at the American Institute in Taiwan 19 years ago, everything was about how our relationship with Taiwan, or how Taiwan affects relations between the U.S. and China. Basically saying, Taiwan was a problem for U.S.-China relations. And then he goes on to say, well, all that has changed. In the past 3 years, we have been focusing on strengthening relations with Taiwan and how, we can work together. The rhetoric, the jargon that he used was something like how we can work together to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is essentially the U.S. term for like working against China's influence in the region. So it's just interesting because, this so-called pivot to Asia that really started under Obama, the stuff with Taiwan that I talk about a lot, like the diplomatic and military support, the new levels, really started under Trump. So that's what he was talking about, how things changed, how it was a problem in relations, and now basically they see China as something that they see Taiwan as something that they can use against China. And it's very clear that has been the policy for the past few years. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Medea Benjamin. The ICC takes on Israel and the U.S. congressional mafia. One from Andrew Coburn. Ukraine war rips veil off of U.S. weapons superiority. One from Daniel Benjamin and Stephen Simon. New 9/11 evidence points to deep Saudi complicity. One from Brad Pierce. The end of Zelensky's legitimacy. And the spotlight is from Lily Greenberg Call. Biden was my boss. I resigned because as a Jew, I cannot endorse the Gaza catastrophe. And that was the woman who resigned from the Interior Ministry. And if you see our picture story here, it's about Randolph Bourne. It's his birthday, May 30th. And for those who don't know, Randolph Bourne is kind of our namesake. So antiwar.com. The parent company of antiwar.com is the Randolph Bourne Institute. And Randolph Bourne was a writer. He didn't live very long. He was born in 1886 and he died in 1918. And he opposed the U.S. entry into World War I, like vehemently. And he wrote for the New Republic, and he was fired from the New Republic for opposing the war. He was involved with a small magazine called The Seven Arts. And basically, for his opposition to war, he got accused of all sorts of things, and the person who funded the magazine pulled out, and he lost that job, and then he died in the flu epidemic. He had other health problems that he struggled with his whole life. But anyway, he's the one who coined the term "war is the health of the state," which is kind of, something you'll see on antiwar.com a lot. So just a really interesting guy, and it's the 138th anniversary of his birthday. And this is a biography from Jeff Riggenbach, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But it's a really good biography about Randolph Bourne if you want to go check it out. And if you've ever listened to like a audiobook, like a Murray Rothbard audiobook, Jeff Riggenbach was probably the narrator. So you probably know what his voice sounds like. But yeah, go check that out. Again, the Randolph Bourne is very interesting. He has a very distinct look. I really like pictures of him. But that is it for me for today. You could always support us by sharing this show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, wherever you prefer to watch. Follow us on Instagram, on X. I will be back tomorrow. One more show this week. Thanks for listening.